Welcome to the Brainstorm with Sparks and Finn, a podcast where we brainstorm the science and philosophy of a new age, an electric universe age, and what it means for the human race, past, present, and future. I'm Finn, sci-fi author, artist, and a space nerd so insufferable even the Trekkies stuffed me into a locker.
Get those nerds! Nerds!
Wow, no. And I'm Sparks, physicist, experimentalist, and pyromaniac. Although I'm no longer legally allowed to purchase lighter fluid or attend the 4th of July.
Fire! Fire! Fire!
In this week's episode, we'll be introducing you to us, the hosts of the Brainstorm, to help give you a better idea of exactly who it is that will be interrogating our lucky guests. So buckle up and let's see where this thing goes.
Doing that, okay. Nope.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the Brainstorm with Sparks and Finn.
At least one of us is here and ready.
So no guest today, but we're just going to be introducing ourselves and kind of letting you know who we are. That way, when we have guests on, you'll know.
You'll have some context.
Yeah, a little context. There you go. So let's start with you. You are an engineer, an experimentalist. What do you do?
I think best way. Those are all good. I like that. Yes. I am self-employed, as are you.
Awesome. Me too. Me too.
I have been self-employed my whole life, which allows me to have a very free schedule and allows me to do fun things like this on the side. So I started out as a window cleaner, with squeegees and all that.
Oh, nice.
And it was fun. My sophomore year of college was down at Southern Utah University in Utah. And I went and got a job at a car dealership detailing cars. I had never heard of detailing cars. I didn't know what that was. And so they took me in the back and said, yeah, you're cleaning out cars, vacuuming, cleaning them. I'm like, oh, I can do that myself. And that thought that I can do that myself was the first spark of entrepreneurship that has fueled me ever since. So when I finished that semester, I came back home to Provo and I thought, wait a minute, I'll just start my own business detailing cars. Mm-hmm. I told a neighbor about that. He said, oh, I've got some friends up at BYU who are washing windows. I thought, I can do that too. So I did. I went and bought all the car detailing, cleaning stuff. I went and bought some squeegees, and I went dunk, 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 started knocking on doors of my tiny little hamlet that I lived in called Oak City, right in the middle of Utah, and just build up my business from there. Build up the window cleaning business. Windows and blinds kind of go hand in hand because you have to move the blinds to clean the windows. We thought, hey, we'll start cleaning blinds too, and then learned the hard way that was not fun the way we were doing it. So we found another company that did blinds, and we worked hand in hand with them for many years until they got out of the business and turned their blind business over to me. And that was 20 years ago. So I am the blind doctor. I do blind repairs, blind cleaning, new blind sales, and it's just me.
Well, how'd you get into the electric universe side of things then?
Oh, because that doesn't have anything to do with science, does it? So most people have hobbies and interests that are outside of their regular work. And mine has always been science. I've always loved it. I love figuring out how things work. Yeah. Which is why the blind doctors was worked so well for me because I get to fix things. So I've always been looking at how things work, including the world around me. So I've always been interested in that. And I've always studied that just on the side. And
I'd argue that's an important part of being a scientist is having that entrepreneurial spirit and being outside of things. You look at things from your own point of view without necessarily having to worry about what your tenured professors are thinking. So you get that big picture look that maybe some people that are more specialized don't necessarily have. So
I'm going to double down on that and say they absolutely don't have that.
Yeah.
Not all of them. But yeah, absolutely. In fact, and I've talked about this before, that big picture view, the Gestalt view of the world, really kind of isolates people like you and me from most people because they see narrow focus down a tube. They just look down a tube and that's all they see. And for people like you and me, we see the whole big picture view. So when the internet came, I had, done what everybody else did and got progressively better and better and better phones.
Hmm.
And it got to the point to where I could do streaming on my phone. So I started watching every science presentation I could find.
Hmm.
I was a big fan of Brian Greene and the World Science Festival. A wonderful, wonderful establishment, but very straight-laced and right down the middle.
Right.
Just dogmatic to the T. Well, YouTube sent me an Electric Universe video. Just the algorithm said, "Hey, here's a thing." And this is before, and this is a very real thing. This is before YouTube started what's it called? Censoring the Electric Universe, because they
Right.
did, and I watched it happen. It was horrible.
Shadow banning.
It was bad. Like I typed in I didn't even type in Electric Universe. I just typed in science videos and it would spit out a bunch of things. And I saw one. It was a presentation by Wal Thornhill, and that was like 7, 8 years ago. I watched it and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. At the same time, I was also listening to NPR. Not
Mm.
that I'm liberal minded. I'm not. I'm pretty open minded. But NPR didn't have any commercials.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I listened to NPR.
I
Well,
think it used to be a little more balanced too, but not so much these days.
they can be left wing. I really don't care. What I
Well,
hate is
not on
when
taxpayer money anyway, but
right. I just hate it when they hide or they don't admit to it. It's
yeah.
like, guys, you're left leaning. Just admit to it. That's fine. I don't care. I was listening to a show called To the Best of Our Knowledge,
Hmm.
and they brought on Rupert Sheldrake.
Oh, nice.
I had never heard of Rupert Sheldrake, but he said enough in that interview that made me think about that electric video that I saw on YouTube. And so I went back and found the electric video and fell in love. And that was the final straw. Everything came crashing down. I stopped watching all other science videos and just went full on Electric Universe. And that was
Yeah, you
about 7, 8 years ago.
once you're in,
Yeah.
there's no going
You
back.
can't. It's like it's like eating garbage all of your life, like out of a dumpster, eating food out of a dumpster, and then actually being invited into the restaurant and eating immaculately prepared food. You're like, oh, I'm never going back to that.
Or Plato's cave, where you finally turn around and realize that you've been looking at shadows on the wall.
Been looking at shadows, and that's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah, I had a
Exactly.
similar experience. I was surfing the web I don't know, 8, 10 years ago, and I came across Dave Talbot's uh, symbols of an ancient sky, or symbols of an alien sky.
That's a great video.
It was, but when I saw it, I was like, this is ridiculous. And I chalked it up to flat earth nonsense and turned it off. And it was probably another month later where it just happened that the electric scarred surface of Mars came on. And that one blew my mind because I've worked with electric arcs in the past. I know how machining works.
Wait, explain that. Go into details.
Well,
What
so
were
I
you
run
doing?
a sign business and we deal with machining metal and stuff like that. And then I've got a microscope, and I don't have a science background. I don't really even have an engineering background. I'm basically a manual laborer, but I've worked alongside in these industries, and you can really see on when you're dealing with electric machining that you're dealing with trillions and trillions of craters. It's not a smooth surface at all. So when we're watching the video about Mars and they're talking about, I think it's the southern hemisphere, which is negative charge, where all the material was lifted away from and deposited on the northern hemisphere.
It's actually, I think it's just the
Is
opposite.
it the opposite? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so the smooth part isn't smooth at all. It's covered in trillions and trillions of craters that are overlapping with their lightning bush. Anyway, for me, that was like the Last Supper moment where once you see Mary Magdalene's in it, you can't really unsee it. So
It doesn't see it.
yeah, once I saw the electric, once I saw the crater chains, and I mean, it looks like a Dremel went across the surface. So then I'm like, okay, and then I went and took another look at Dave Talbot's work and found Wall, and it was all from there.
That's interesting that you bring up crater chains like that, because my first experience with the community, with the Electric Universe community,
Mhm.
was having a crater chain discussion with Robert Hawthorne, another contributor to Thunderbolts, on a Skype call
Uh-huh.
with him and a couple other people. And I was giddy with excitement because by this time I had found the Electric Universe, found the community, and all of a sudden this video by Robert Hawthorne pops up on the Thunderbolts project, and I recognized some of the pictures he was using. I'm like, wait a minute, that's Utah. Is this
Yeah.
guy in Utah? So I looked him up and found out he was over in Vernal,
Oh, nice.
in that area, and I'm like, this is fantastic. So I reached out to him, and he talks to me like you and I talk like every day. I talk to Robert almost every day as well.
Oh, wow.
But one of the first things we did is we got on Google Earth and we started looking at craters, at impact craters or volcanic craters. And we saw the telltale signs of crater change, crater
Hmm.
chains,
Yeah.
which is exactly indicative of an arc discharge going
Yeah.
right across. And there's some right up here at the top of my state, just into Idaho at Crater Lake National Park. And I remember one of the first feedbacks that I got from someone in Electric Universe was Robert Hawthorne typing in a message about this picture that I had posted. He's like, "Hey, this was a good find."
Yeah.
And that, it was just a simple little concept, but man, it just inspired me. I'm like, "Oh, this is
Eureka!
cool."
Yeah.
I found
It's
something and somebody
incredible.
else validated it. I'm like, this could be fun.
Yeah, it's incredible the way the land tells its own history. In Washington, where I'm at, we've got quite a bit of stuff too. But what really blows my mind is I'm big into the ancient apocalypse theory, ancient civilizations, and the Younger Dryas floods. And in Western Washington, or excuse me, in Eastern Washington, you can see the way the land is cut. What is the term I'm looking for? Where you're at the bottom of the ocean and you can see the wave patterns imprinted into the sand. I'm sure there's a term for it.
Don't know what that is, but I know what you're talking about.
But
Yeah.
that little scale like pattern that you see. But anyway, that can directly be scaled up to tell you how big the waves are that cause it. And when you look at Eastern Washington, those wave patterns are indicative of waves over a mile high.
Yeah.
So
That is terrifying.
also,
That is a
yeah, that's
terrifying.
very terrifying. So I'd really love to get in contact with Randall Carlson at some point to figure out if he's heard of the Electric Universe. I kind of suspect he has because on that channel they're pushing the plasma engine. But there's nothing better that, in my mind, describes the cataclysmic cycle than the Electric Universe model. And I know that we talked about this before. You're not thinking so much a cycle, but I'm still on the cycle part of it, mostly because of the story about the Hermetics talking to Solon and describing how they remember the period before the last six floods, whereas the ancient Greeks only remember the period behind the last flood.
Thank you for bringing that up because the cycle that I'm resisting is, I probably shouldn't name him by name, another contributor. So we'll talk about that. You know who I'm talking about?
Does it rhyme with Sam Lamb Chop?
It doesn't. It actually. Okay, we're not going to go there.
All right.
I disagree with his version of it. However, in talking to you, it's Ben Davidson. I'm not going to be wimpy about this.
Oh,
It's
Ben Davidson.
and suspicious observers.
Sure, sure.
The only reason that I'm not a fan, well, there's a couple reasons I'm not a fan of it, but one thing that I have learned in talking to you and actually reading original Velikovsky
Mm-hmm.
is that when we had the thunderbolts happen because we had the planets moving, we had Mars, Venus, Saturn changing positions.
Yeah.
But the reverberations, I think, are what you're seeing as the cycle. There
Mm-hmm.
had to be some sort of cyclical thing because the ancients were obsessed with looking at the sky and obsessed with calendars. There's
Yeah.
no reason to be obsessed with the sky and calendars if there wasn't a repeating cycle of destruction that you had to hide from.
Yeah. Plus the megalithic construction, that sort of. In my short story, the Mirror of Thoth, I kind of pull a switcheroo where I describe a civilization that looks like ours with skyscrapers made of metal and plastic. And it isn't until the computer overlords begin deploying their weather weapons that we start building stone cities to resist hurricanes and tornadoes and that sort of thing. So when I'm talking about ancient civilizations, I view those giant Sumerian stone cities as more advanced, not less advanced than what we have.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Very interesting idea.
Go ahead. Well, it makes sense when you have this crazy weather going on. Now, I'm a conspiracy theorist to the hilt, Ron Paul libertarian, and I'm pretty sure HARP is messing with our weather. Call me crazy, but
that no, 100% agree. I can tell you
all the other HARP institutions around.
Right. Oh no, it actually is. It actually is, but it doesn't have to be in any kind of dark conspiratorial thing.
Well, yeah, it's declassed now. I mean, we can read the budget.
Right. But the actual instances of where they use HARP to steer hurricanes and create weather, I think is still classified. But what they have released and what you can see, I mean, just the science of it, it creates weather. It literally does, because it beams this swirling pattern of electromagnetic radiation into the ionosphere and heats it up. When it heats it up, everybody knows that when you heat something up, it lifts. Well, as the atmosphere lifts, the cooler atmosphere at the sides, at the flanks, come rushing in. But that's what we call weather. That's what weather is. That's what wind is. That's how wind is generated. That is the textbook way of how wind is generated. Is that you have heat from the sun heating the surface. The air on the surface rises, and then that solar air rushes sideways winds.
Would you say it's true that because the night side of Earth is more negatively charged and the day side of Earth is more positively charged, that would create current chasing each other, and that's where we get the jet stream, the winds from?
That's a great idea. I haven't actually looked into that directly. I had never heard that there was a charge differential on the Earth like that. That absolutely makes sense. In fact, I can't see how it would not be that case, because you've got the solar wind blasting the sunny side.
I got that from Walt Thornhill, and the reason he told me about it was I called him up years and years ago and interviewed him for writing my book, because I wanted to create a sci-fi piece that would help bring Electric Universe to the community of people that like to read fantasy and sci-fi books.
Right.
And I was asking him what the proto-Saturnian environment might be like. And one of the things that he said is that there's no wind, really. Maybe a little bit, but barely any wind, because you don't have that day-night cycle in the proto-Saturnian environment. And this brings up so many interesting things. For example, in that environment, you've got purple light, right? And in purple light, what kind of things grow well? Well, fungus, conifers, very little wind, no flowers, nothing that seeds by wind dispersal fertilization. So it basically it's all the sorts of plants that we saw during when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And the plant and animal gigantic, well, we already discussed the gravitational differences that might come from orbiting Saturn as opposed to Sol, given that one is a much stronger cathode. So a lot of that stuff really lined up with prehistoric Earth and just strikes of making sense. And that explanation of how wind is generated also makes sense. But one of the more important things, and this goes into our theories about space. You've heard of the, the Drake equation, where we calculate that there should be life, but we're not seeing it, right? Well, I believe there is life all over the place, but I think it takes shape inside these wombs of life, these great mothers, as I call them in my book, which is a brown dwarf or a red dwarf star, where it's not big enough to go into arc mode, but its plasma sheath is igniting into glow mode. And that creates a stable, abundant condition where you have verdant plant and animal life. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't create the kind of environment that is conducive to raising IQ levels, because you've always got food. You've It's more of an environment for our selection where there's plenty of food, so there's no need to compete for it. But more importantly, once we get out of that womb and we have a day-night cycle, we start getting these harsh winters. Suddenly, you've got the catalyst for IQ to develop, because now you got to save your seed crop through the winter or you starve to death. So the one of the main drivers of IQ is the need to delay gratification. So if you're in an environment where the food grows 24/7 and you don't have to worry about saving your seed crop, you're never going to rise above animal intelligence. You're never going to get that higher intellect carbon life. So only by removing us from the womb and putting us into the orbit of an arc mode star do we start to develop human intelligence.
Right.
In a way, you could say it's our suffering that makes us brilliant.
That's a really interesting point. The other thing that I can't help but that you've been describing is you're describing the quote unquote piece of Frode, the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, the Garden of
You're
Eden.
Because you're thinking, it's like, wait a minute, how did that concept even appear?
Yeah.
How did that appear? Because we have a piece of Frode, I think was the that's what I think that's what the Dutch called it, if I remember. I'm trying to remember back to Dave Talbot's description of that. But he talks specifically about all the different cultures that have a concept of a Garden of Eden. And
it's on the Sumerian stones.
Right. So that concept has to be somewhere. But then, Finn, this is where it gets really interesting. If we have a knowledge of that, and that knowledge has been passed down, and not necessarily by books, then that means mankind had to have been alive at the time when that happened.
Yeah.
It had to have been there, which means, oh, maybe our time scales are a little off.
I think a lot of the Thunderbolts guys attribute the Garden of Eden to a plasma formation in the sky. I've seen that on a few of the symbols of ancient skies, but I think it's got more to do with the Proto-Saturnian environment.
I do too.
A lot of ancient religions talk about the ancient purple dawn of time, and this would have been a period where people were still innocent. What do we mean by innocent? We were still basically animals, right?
And we didn't have the fighting for resources like we do now.
Yeah,
which would mean that we didn't have to think about how to take away stuff. We didn't have to be
knowledge of good and evil, right? We were just living.
Deviousness didn't exist.
Yeah,
there was no need.
And then you've got the famous line, "Let there be light" in the Bible. To me, this is when our ancestors were living inside the Proto-Saturnian womb with a purple sky of mist and no concept of sun or stars. And then once Saturn brushes up against the sun's heliosphere and flares, and that plasma sheet blows off, suddenly you've got light, you've got starlight. I mean, the heavens and the earth, or well, the heavens anyway. And also, wouldn't it be reasonable to suppose that ancient people who lived enmeshed in mist all the time, thick ground fog that you can't see far through, wouldn't they call that waters? So when the Sumerians about Apsu and the waters and how we came from the primeval waters, and Marduk came and destroyed Apsu and pushed him back into the sea. Well, that could be allegorious for the mists vanishing, returning to the sea. And who's Marduk? Marduk is the sun. Zechariah Stitchin has the idea that Marduk represents Nibiru, and they've got the Planet X thing. I think that's a mistranslation. Well, I mean, a lot of his stuff was probably mistranslations. But when you read the story written on the Sumerian stones, and they're talking about how Marduk, crowned in fire and glory, comes spinning into the solar system, well, they're describing a flyby where Saturn and the planets trailing behind shoot past Marduk. One of them gets nailed. Probably what we call Tiamat, which might be one of our asteroid belts now.
That's what I think.
But that's what I think they're describing. And I think Marduk is the sun.
I do too. I completely agree. You know what's fascinating is that as you dive into the electric universe, it is, as Wal Thornhill said, a true cosmology. His definition of a true cosmology is a structure of understanding that touches every facet of life. It doesn't ignore consciousness, it doesn't ignore biology, it doesn't just focus on outer space and planets. Like, cosmology has that idea that it just deals with everything above our heads. No, no,
No.
I agree with them. A true cosmology explains everything. And so, for those who are new to the electric universe and they're like, well, I'm not interested in planets, fine. What are you interested in? Find that niche, find that corner, and the electric universe will welcome you in because
Sure. Well,
whatever
whatever
you're
they're
interested
interested in, it's got electrons in it. Everything has electrons.
Right.
So, if to me, one of the most obvious arguments for the electric universe and kind of the theory of everything that it will eventually be is just that fact. Like, you can't deny there are literally electrons in everything, and everything has to do with charge differential.
That's right. Well, so someone, I don't remember, it might have been you or someone else who said the electric universe claims that there's electricity in space and that there's these long conduits of electricity. Well, where does that come from? And it comes from exactly what you just said. Matter, sorry, is all composed of electrons. Those electrons have a charge. So anywhere there is matter, there is charge. What does charge do? Does it just sit next to other charge and not move? Of course it doesn't. We find that whenever charge is around another charge, it's usually doing this.
Right.
Almost
Spin.
all the time. But even so, I mean, that's such a simplistic explanation. But, foundationally, that's what it is. Everything is made of electrons, and electrons are charged by nature. And here's one thing. This is going to be just a little bit funny. There are people out there that saying you can't make a perpetual motion device, right?
Sure.
And I've had arguments with people online about this. I'm like, okay, the electron. The electron, to our best understanding, here's the nucleus of an atom. Here's the electron. It never stops.
That's true. But
take this. Go
something
ahead.
could be fueling it.
It could. But to our, and I think there is, and Tom Bearden has talked about what fuels an electron, where does charge come from, and he talks about that it comes from the time domain, and it's a big, huge concept. You're like, whoa, we're not going to go into that. But if you want to, read Tom Bearden's book. I've actually got it upstairs on my nightstand, and that's what I've been reading this last week.
Does it personify time as a thing?
I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay. That would be my issue, because I don't believe anything that tries to treat time as some sort. I mean, I don't want to sound like a jerk. His book is probably cool, but we talked about this last week with Steve, that time is just an abstraction. And not only is it an abstraction, it's different for everyone perceiving it.
Right. I like your analogy when you talk about a hummingbird or a fly, of how their optic nerve is so much smaller than ours, and their auditory nerve is so much smaller lengthwise that the signal can actually get to its brain faster than ours. So what does life look like as a bug, as an insect,
I imagine
a butterfly?
You remember in old movies like Jason and the Argonauts, they've kind of done away with it these days, which I think is a big mistake. But in those old movies, whenever they'd have a giant on screen, he'd always be moving really slow and lumbering. But it seemed more realistic. Like, intuitively, we know that's how it works. But in movies these days, you got King Kong flying around like he's Spider-Man. And it doesn't have the same sort of realism, because when you picture how fast that big lumbering iron golem walking down the beach on Jason and the Argonauts is moving, his foot is moving really fast, like far faster than the little people are running, even though he appears to be going in slow motion. Right?
It appears,
because you're still dealing with the air pressure and moving all that mass for a set amount of distance.
Right. And that's probably what flies look at us. We're the lumbering robots, trying to spot them.
The reason why the easiest way to squish a fly is to move your hand really slowly, because when you do that to the fly, it's like watching a plant grow. They can't even perceive the movement.
I have caught so many flies doing that. Like, if a fly's sitting on my hand, you just slowly come up. And then when you get close enough, You got to get really close. Just bam,
Yeah.
caught. That's how I've caught all my flies.
Yeah, and that's a great example of now imagine that you are some kind of subatomic microbe living on subatomic matter. How slow we must be moving, you know?
We might
Like,
not even be perceptible
yeah,
as a conscious entity if you get down that small.
yeah, as above, so below.
Right.
I am a big believer that when you're looking at galaxies, you're looking at the molecular structure of something bigger.
Right.
Maybe we're a table leg. I keep waiting for like
No.
whoever lives in the quantum above us to flip a light switch on and suddenly space is white instead of black.
We're like, whoa, what just happened?
But that's weird.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, let's go back to talking a little bit more about our backgrounds and stuff.
Oh, sure.
Give me just 2 seconds. Let me grab something.
A few moments later.
When you were talking about Mars, about your introduction into the EU, and about how you saw Mars,
Oh, look at that.
this is a 3D model that I printed out with my 3D printer. And that's another thing I do. I do 3D printing.
That is awesome.
Isn't that cool?
I don't suppose you have Venus so we can show that the scars match almost perfectly on the equator.
I have been looking for a model, haven't found one yet.
To me, that's about the biggest proof we got of the electric catastrophes that were happening is when you've got Saturn speeding towards Sol, you've got Venus and Mars ping-ponging between and Earth. And every time they get too close is when you get those static shocks. And it's just a little strange that both have the same spiral shaped scar right on their equator. And then you've got the Grand Canyon too.
And that's not really known about Venus because
No.
Venus is enshrouded in that huge cloud layer. But then when we set up the satellites that peered through the cloud layer, what did we see? There's this gargantuan gash. It goes all the way around the equator of Venus.
Yep. Yep.
You're just
Now,
like, whoa, that looks familiar.
so where did Venus come from? Some say it was Jupiter, but I had this idea that it's Saturn that spit it out, but maybe it was Jupiter. I don't know. But it seems like the intense electrical stress of Saturn entering into the domain of Sol might have caused it to spit a moon out.
Right. So here's my little idea, and it's just an opinion. It's not really based on anything scientific. I think it came from Jupiter. And the
Okay.
reason I think that is because I think that's the genesis of the Great Red Spot.
Yeah, I agree. The red spot is definitely something.
I think it's a birthing scar.
Right. I think they
So-
shoot out moons, and most of the time the moons are too small to escape their orbit, so they just become moons. But when you get a really big one with enough velocity because of some electrical stress, it's going to escape the moon orbit and it's going to jockey for position in the sun's orbits. And I think when that happens is when you get these insane cataclysms where the world stops spinning one way and starts going the other way, and now you've got a 2 mile high wall of water and 1,000 mile per hour winds because the atmosphere keeps going the same direction it's been going.
Right. Yeah, there's and I was going to touch on this before, the causal reasons for the great floods that every society historically talks about have a couple different things that it could be. It could be just the huge supersonic winds from a thunderbolt hitting the planet. It could be the fact that the planet just stopped and then the water's like, nope, we're still moving. Those are two ways that we could have gigantic floods. Absolutely.
This was
interesting.
It would be an interesting experiment to run to see what conditions would stop a planet from orbiting. Now, I imagine we can use. You've seen the primer fields, right?
Yes.
I know you took some issue with the bell-shaped magnets, but the idea that you get that ecliptic and things stop in orbit. Nice. There's got to be a way to experiment with how they're rotating and what would cause them to change rotating. So that might be a future.
So that actually is a really good dovetail to my meeting Walt Thornhill, or not meeting. I've never actually met him, but I've had a lot of Skype conversations. That idea about what does gravity do to a rotating ball was an experiment that Wall asked me to do for him
Hmm.
when we first met. In fact, when we first met, I found his website and his email was at the bottom of it. And I'm fearless. I just emailed him and I said, "Thank you for your work. Well done. I love what you do." It was literally like a sentence and a half. Because I kind of figured that everybody and their goat was talking to this guy, that he had no time for someone like me. And I was wrong.
Only, yeah.
I was
If
wrong.
they should have been.
He sent back like a multi-paragraph email. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's actually going to talk to me. So
Yeah.
I felt emboldened and I emailed him back and we started corresponding. And one of the first things that he asked is if I would do an experiment for him trying to establish gravity. I'm like, hell yeah, I'll do that. And I've
Well,
got,
what was?
so it was these right here. He asked me to buy these and I did. These are
Okay.
these are Hallback arrays. This is an aluminum ring and the little squares are magnets.
Ah,
And you can put them in any configuration you want. You can put north facing up, north facing this way, north facing back here, north facing on the inner surface. And he
sure.
said, put them in a certain configuration, suspend them, and watch what they do. And so I did that. And I have that all filmed out. I didn't ever publish it because the lighting on it was so horrible. I was embarrassed about how bad it looked. And
Uh-huh.
then he passed away and then we weren't able to finish it. But the
Huh.
whole concept was is that when you change the magnetic configuration of a planet, that does something to when it comes near another planet. And that's what we were investigating. We wanted to see how it did that. Because, you know, we talk about the Earth as being just a general bipolar magnet, and we have a North Pole and a South Pole, but it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen the map, the magnetic map of the surface of the Earth. Have you ever looked at that?
Probably, but
It
go.
it's what it shows you. You would think that, well, we'll just see red at the North Pole and blue at the South Pole. It's
No, it's like
patchy.
orange.
It's patchy.
Yeah.
There are red and blue poles all over the surface of the Earth. Now, as a conglomerate, as a whole big thing, north points that way and south points that way. But there are, I don't know if magnetic anomalies is the best way to say it, but the magnetic field of any surface is very, very non-homogeneous. In fact,
Right.
I can actually show you that. Look,
While
you
you're
can't
digging,
see, this is
you're
off camera, but I have my magnetic wall right there where I keep all my magnets. This is a magnetic field viewer. This is just a steel plate with a bunch of magnets on it, but I want you to focus on that middle one. Watch.
Whoa.
You would think that the field of that plate would be homogeneous, but it's not.
Wait.
It has a
Uh,
disruption right in the middle of it.
humor my smooth brain. What is this square that you're holding in front of it? Why is it doing that?
Okay, so it's just called a magnetic field viewer. It has tiny little particles embedded in it that are susceptible to magnetic fields. It's like what's that called? Ferrofluid.
Oh, okay.
You know what ferrofluid is?
It's like a magnetic type, like mercury or something.
It's actually little tiny pieces of metal that are magnetically conductive and just it's suspended in a fluid. Well,
Okay.
this is the flat version of that.
Okay.
In fact, on my TikTok channel,
Incredible.
I actually have I took a microscope and I zoomed in on this guy and you can see the little particles spinning because what I did is I took a magnet and I spun it underneath that. So you can actually see the little guys moving.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool? You can
It's very
see magnetic fields.
And this reminds me of what Steve was talking about last week, where he mentioned that there are tons of filaments coming off of the sun. We've got the main Birkeland currents, but then we've got all these other little streamers that are coming to the Earth. We don't know what they do. Could that be why the magnetic pole looks so splotchy? Is because everywhere one of these things hit, they're changing the polarity of that area?
Right. It could be. And that
Yeah.
was our conversation last week with Steve was fascinating. And he actually texted me 2 days ago. He says, "When's part two?" I said, "Don't worry, it's coming up second week of April." So spoiler, not spoiler, but just everybody know we're having Steve Smith back second week of April,
Yeah, he was
part two.
fascinating.
Oh, I've had nothing but fun conversations with him. It's just amazing.
And I keep talking about the proto Saturn theory like it's just Saturn, but I guess I've got to figure in Ouroboros or Ouroboros.
That's a snake eating its own tail.
Yeah.
I still don't
A
have
gas
that.
giant that split into four, and he's saying that's what created some of our gas giant planets was this thing dividing like mitosis.
Right. And so I want to explore that idea. And I mean, I think he's already said it, but what if Saturn and Jupiter were one planet and they went whoop?
That's
How about
pretty
that?
wild. Yeah, consider that.
Consider, but see, if you talk to a normal dogmatic scientist about that, they're going to immediately poo-poo that. But it's like, wait a minute.
Unscientific. Woo!
It's just frustrating. It's like, wait a minute. This is what I love about the electric universe is now that we've got a new way of looking at everything that actually fulfills criteria, fulfills predictions, unlike the standard model, we can now go back and look at everything we thought we knew and gain real understanding. Like the door is not closed on discovery anymore.
No,
It is
no.
wide open.
Yeah, we're pioneers in a new space age, basically, which I think is just amazing. And it's not just in electric universe. I mean, it's across the board. If there's anything the human race has learned over the last 10 years, is that you really can't trust experts. And it's not that they're bad people at all.
They're not
that,
bad people.
Who's writing the damn textbooks, you know? And what we've discovered isn't that they're not intelligent. They're very intelligent, but they don't seem to have that ability to question authority and say, wait a minute, maybe my textbook is wrong. And that, I think that's where the electric universe shines, is we can take the whole damn thing all the way back to that first misconception in the space sciences, which is that the solar wind is charged neutral.
We have touched on so many things that we could go off on that I want to go off on. But I have to bring up one thing. I know what you want to talk about, and you danced around it very beautifully just there. Because it's a topic that we're going to talk to Michael Claridge about here next week. And
yeah, I don't want to.
I don't want to spoil that too much, but I heard you dance around it. And I'm like, well done, sir. Well done. That was fun because
It's really been on my mind. I can't wait to talk to Michael because to me, this is the smoking gun we've been waiting for.
Right?
And
I know.
In fact, let's see. SpaceX is sending up the Fram 2 mission in the near future.
What's
and I
that?
keep posting all over Twitter. Well, let's see, what are the details of it? I'm a little sketchy there. It's low Earth orbit, but they're heading up near the ionosphere, and they could literally attach a couple of Langmuir probes to their craft, and they could measure the solar wind to see if all the electrons are going in one direction and the ions are going in the other direction. And if they find that steady stream, that's indicative of electric current.
Right. So speaking of that, Don Scott turned one of his presentations on Thunderbolt on one of the conferences turned me onto a website called earth.nullschool.net.
Okay.
And that was the video where he talked about people filming the aurora from the surface of the earth and seeing that swirling pattern. Let me show you what's right behind my camera. That is earth.nullschool.net, and you see two counter spinning vortices right over the North Pole.
Wow.
And anybody can go there and look at that. That's not just me, but I've had that up. In fact, the other version of it, or another instance of it, is right there in my lab.
Is that the norm?
What's that?
Is that the norm? Like that's what it usually looks like? Or is this?
That's a great question. Yes and no.
Okay.
Because what you just saw with all those pinks and blues and greens on the one behind you, that are the wind currents at what's called 10 hectopascals. It just means it's way, way up there above the jet stream. Okay.
Oh.
It does always look like that And it also changes from day to day. So
Interesting.
sometimes you will see a single vortex, and a lot of times you will see these double vortexes.
Do you think those vortexes are connected to currents? Like
Oh, I
Brooklyn
know they
current?
are. They absolutely are.
So that means we've got filaments connecting, reconnecting, and that could do a lot to explain changes in the climate. If you've got more connections pumping in more input, you might have a hotter environment.
Let's tick some people off right now, shall we? Hey, kids,
Indeed.
climate change isn't human caused. It's this. It's the sun. The sun,
Yeah.
the CMEs and all of the solar winds and the connection that we have, the electrical connection with the sun, creates our climate in ways that make our efforts of pollution and whatnot inconsequential.
Yeah.
However,
Imagine believing that climate change has nothing to do with the giant ball of arc mode fire in the sky. And also, don't we get climate change on all the planets at the same time?
right,
I'm pretty sure there's no SUVs on Mars, but
right, exactly.
go on. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then there's also this. The way that it's formulated is they tabulate all the known causes of temperature differential, and anything that's unknown, they just flat attribute to humans. But there's a lot of things they don't include, which probably should be included, like gamma radiation off of the sun. So, yeah, I think climate change is pretty much busted. It's just a WEF control thing or something. But
I agree. When you actually look at the data that's out there, like on nullschool.net, on windy.com has the same data set. They just present it a little differently. You all of a sudden see it's like, oh, wait a minute. Our efforts to disrupt our planet are nothing. They're a myth. They're a story that gets told because it makes people feel like I'm saving the planet, and it gets them riled up so that they will say, "Please take my tax money and
take my money,
take
my freedom."
But that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's just a fantasy. However, that being said, there is a real issue that is related to climate, and that is pollution.
Oh, sure.
If we are using climate change to clean up polluters, I might be in favor of climate change arguments if that's what the end goal is. But to say that humans are influencing the planet is just stupid. Yeah. It's just stupid. It's like a microbe that lives on my forehead saying, I can control this human. It's absurd.
How dare you?
However,
well,
pollution
MRSA
is
or something.
What's that?
Unless that microbe is MRSA.
Yeah, we could talk about that too.
No, I think we can definitely do damage to our environment.
To our local environment.
Yes.
To our
what
local
I don't think we're
environment.
doing is affecting the weather. Unless it's because we're flying planes and spraying aluminum particulates in the sky. The biggest thing to me is like,
which does happen. That does happen.
I could potentially believe the climate change thing if I didn't know the government could drive around hurricanes and make things look insane and then blame it on climate change. You know what I mean?
Yep. Okay, so
but the fact that this technology exists, the fact that we know they're doing it, kind of hurts the argument that the bad weather is because our carbon footprint.
Yep. Okay.
And also, I mean, in the ice age, we had 10 times more CO2 in the atmosphere than we do now. And we know that CO2 and temperature, well, the CO2 follows the temperature anywhere from 800 to 1,000 years, or maybe it's 500 to 1,000 years. So when the temperature is going up, the CO2 is following, but then the temperature will start to go down and the CO2 will continue to climb for anywhere from 500 to 1,000 years.
But unless you study that, you get taught the reverse.
Yes, that Al Gore reversed the ice core samples.
So
put the CO2 before the temperature.
Right. So my wife teaches biology, or she teaches science, the 7th and 8th grade level right now. And she comes home just this week lamenting that when she's trying to teach her students that greenhouse gases are good and that global warming is good because of all the ecological benefits, she gets met with stares of and responses like, no, it's not. No, it's not. because we've all been taught by the media that it's bad. And she's like, she's a biologist by training. And she's like, no, no, it's not. This is what we need.
What do plants breathe, children?
If it wasn't for global warming anciently, we would have never created an atmosphere on the planet.
Yeah.
That's what created the atmosphere.
Yeah. And then you go to the medieval warm period where they're growing grapes in England for wine. And in fact, you could say that it was the end of the global warming period, or not the medieval warm period, that gave England all the control over Europe, because France was still trying to grow wheat. And England wisely switched to turnips because they realized it was getting a lot colder. And then pretty soon France had to buy food from England, and that changed the economic power structure.
Amazing how your view of the world changes when you just do a little bit of research.
Yeah.
Turn off the news, turn off the TV, and actually read primary sources and go back in history. It's like, wow, that's
my buddy. I had a buddy that convinced me global warming was fake just by breaking out a bunch of weather pattern graphs and showing me historical weather patterns and saying, see, it's not really any different. That wouldn't apply now because they're remote controlling hurricanes all over the place. But back then, before they were doing it, it was pretty persuasive.
Right.
Right. Funny story about that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
This is one of the main reasons I feel confident in challenging physicists, who are supposed to be, yards smarter than me, and they probably are when it comes to math. But I don't know that being good at math makes you good at critical thinking. But I was in this debate with two of my physicist buddies, and one of them, well, they're both geologists. One's a physicist. And we were having an argument because I described firing an arrow out of my bow and the way it kicks forward. And they're laughing at me saying, that's impossible. All the physics say that whenever a projectile leaves, it's going to kick the other way. And they laughed at me for a good half an hour until we looked it up on the internet and I showed them a slow motion video of it happening. And then they're like, oh, we forgot about ground friction, right? Because if you did it in the vacuum of space, yeah, you might go flying the other way. But on Earth, that's not going to happen. And that kind of gave me an insight that you can be really intelligent, but you can also get lost in your own small section of knowledge. And no matter how good your theories are, no matter how solid your math is, if it contradicts direct observation, it's no good.
Right. And that's what
I'm not a physicist, but I've shot a lot of bow and arrows and I know how they work. So,
right. Well, it's interesting. We talked about this earlier, that it's not that these scientists with lettered degrees are bad. They're not. Dr. Ian McGilchrist has studied how the brain works, and Wal Thornhill talked about him as well. And referenced him, and he has demonstrated or shown that the more specialized your knowledge becomes,
A few moments later.
Okay, this is a bathroom break.
A few moments later.
Oh, I didn't even invite you back. I just came back in. Let me make sure we're still recording.
Invited myself.
A few moments later.
Okay, let's you and I have never had a problem talking about stuff, but this episode was to learn a little bit more about us. So I know you've got something else that you can bring up. I've got one thing else. So why don't you go ahead? Tell us about Breath of Life.
Oh, okay. So years ago, I went to Elegant Simplicity, the Electric Universe Conference. What was that? 2015, I want to say.
Right, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and I was already in love with the theory by then. I mean, I going all the way back to my early 20s, I've been a pretty good forecaster of what's happening in the world. I think at least all the conspiracy theories I bought into turned out to be true, and so I've got no reason to think that this one isn't as well. And so far, the evidence seems really in its favor. So I went with a buddy of mine down to the conference, met some of the people, and talked to Wal Thornhill for a while, and I really wanted to do something to help. But I'm an artist. I couldn't call myself an author at the time, but I had been trying to write a book for many, many years, but I never really had a good subject that captured me. So I decided, well, I'll try to do an Electric Universe book and help out Wall. So I mentioned him to the idea. He thought it was a great idea. He agreed with me. What were we talking about? Nobody knows who invented the rocket engine, but everybody knew about Jules Verne, who wrote it into his fiction book, right? And my idea is that if you really want an idea to become mainstream, you've got to entertain people. So I thought I would come up with a sci-fi book that encased it and hope that it might take off and get enough publicity that people that aren't necessarily into the Electric Universe would be introduced to it in a way that made them more susceptible to believing it.
Great
and
idea.
what I mean, if you're entertained, like I know geek culture, being a geek myself, that's what originally got me into sci-fi, was reading sci-fi and fantasy and wanting to get down into the nuts and bolts and see how it worked. And so I thought if we could do an Electric Universe sci-fi, we might get the same reaction from people who might want to dig further into the theory. So I wrote a book, but it didn't go particularly well. It was a fine story, but I didn't really have a plot, nothing to put into its place. And then one day I got into binaural beats. Somebody introduced me to that. And so I was listening to I don't know if you're familiar with the gateway process or the gateway experience, excuse me.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
But
a
the Monroe
CIA
Institute.
program.
Yep.
Yeah. So I tried that and I had the most mind-blowing dreams, like some of them while I was awake, some of them while I was asleep, but basically it just showed my book to me, like all the way through. And there's still a lot that I made up, the cheesy fantasy story that goes around it. But ultimately, the main core plot, all the main concepts came to me in what I can only describe as instant inspiration. And so I feverishly spent the next couple of years writing it out and getting it published. I sent it to the Thunderbolts guys saying, hey, this is what I've got going on. And then they asked me to narrate some of the Thunderbolts T-pods, and that's how I got involved in it.
Right.
So, yeah, but the book is, it is Electric Universe. I'm not going to say exactly how or what parts, just because I want it to be a surprise when people read it.
Sure.
It isn't so much based around the ideas or trying to preach or push them. It's more every fantasy has its setting, and my setting is Proto-Saturn.
Right.
Yeah.
There we go. Well said. And that book is called
The Breath of Life, and it's part of the Aquarian Cycle series because I've got a part 2 that happens more in like the modern day,
right,
where I go into I better not say anything.
Yeah, don't not too many spoilers. Is that what you have right there behind you?
Yeah. But this is the only copy in existence with a cover that isn't colored. Every other physical copy has a color cover.
Well,
I got an author's copy, then I redid the cover, and so if it ever goes anywhere, hopefully that one will be worth something.
Well, when we first met and started talking, a month or so ago, you told me about it, and one thing I loved about it, and this audience should really like that too. It's an audiobook. But it's not just an audiobook. It's what would you call it, narrative style? I mean, you've got sound effects, you've got different voices. It's not just Matt Finn reading a book, blah, 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 blah. And I love that because I'm a fan personally of old time radio shows. I've worked
that's what I was going for.
And it is a beautiful example of that. So if you guys like listening to dramatically narrated with sound effects and all of that stories, Breath of Life.
Well, thank you.
It's a little
I think
bloody.
One of the big things about it is that like I had to learn to do all this stuff myself, from playing guitar and making music. I'd never done any of it. So I do all the voice acting, I do the music, I do all the sound design. So
that's even more impressive.
Yeah, I didn't want to, like, my first, I had a rough draft up on YouTube, the first 2 chapters, and it was more like a movie playing while I'm narrating to it. But I think some people thought it was too much. I don't know. Some people liked it too, but I toned it down so that basically whenever one of the characters is speaking, you get the sound of what's going on around behind them, like you're watching.
Which is so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. Yep. I'm listening to it now, actually.
Oh,
but like I told you, I went back and started listening to it again just because I liked it. I never listened to things once.
Yeah.
Because I found that human nature is if you hear a thing one time and then you spit it back out, it starts to distort.
Yeah.
And especially with Electric Universe, I did not want to distort Wall's ideas, Dave's ideas, anybody's ideas. So I would listen to their presentations over and over and over to make sure that when I spat it back out, it was clear. And I'm doing the same thing with your book.
Oh, thank you.
So I listen to it and then I'll go back and listen to it again. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I just listened to it because there's so much in there and so many characters. I'm like, I'm getting lost. And so I would go back and it's like, okay, I'll listen to it again. Okay, now I know who this is. And no, now I'm lost again. Now I'll go back and listen to it again. So, but that's just
my main three inspirations are Bernard Cornwell, who does are you familiar with The Lost Kingdom? It's a show on Netflix, I think, about like about the Danes invading England and
no,
the
I'll
rise
tell you
of
a
the
secret.
first
I
king
don't
of
really
England.
watch TV.
Oh man. Anyway, I read the book, so I watched it. But
Right.
he does like historical fiction that's really grounded in realism as far as like the characters, the way they engage in shield wall combat, things like that.
Oh, that sounds
So
cool.
that was one inspiration. The other inspiration is John C. Wright, who wrote The Golden Age, which to me is the most mind-blowing sci-fi you will ever hear. But it's a stiff learning curve because you've got to learn his style of how he writes and start to get an idea of understanding what the technology is. And like with mine, you got to probably read it more than once to truly grasp what he's talking about. And then the third inspiration is Game of Thrones. I'm a huge fantasy nerd. I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons and reading Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman. So there's a lot of elements of that too. But once I read Game of Thrones, that kind of killed fantasy for me because when you go from like the happy-go-lucky stories where the hero always gets saved by an arrow shooting through the noose and at the last second, and then you get to George R. R. Martin, where your favorite characters are getting massacred in every chapter. That kind of gritty realism like kind of killed the tone for me for normal fantasy. So The Breath of Life is kind of a mix of all three of those things. It is a classic hero's journey with a lot of elements that we haven't been able to have because of our politically correct environment. For example, I don't have any female kung fu fighters that are beating the crap out of guys 3 times their own size. The women in the book they have a more feminine role. It's not that they're, Betty Cleaver, but they're celebrated for their feminine strengths, not because they act like asshole men, if that makes
yeah, it does.
That kind of modern trope we have. So you've got a classic hero's tale with decent ethics, decent fathers. It tells a story about family and community and all the classic hero tropes, So there's that, but there's also a pretty good sized cast of characters that have their own factions that are all kind of working against each other. So there's some learning curve, just like with Game of Thrones, where when you're first reading it, like that's a lot of characters. But as it goes, you begin to see who's who and where they fit in. And a lot of them are kind of ancillary characters that are more for like the nerds like me that love to dive into each faction.
Right.
But for the casual reader, they'll kind of all blend into the good guys and the bad guys and the ones in between.
I'm starting to tell who the good guys and the bad guys are.
Yeah. Well, we'll see about that. But.
Yeah. Oh, wow. All right. That sounds fun. Yeah, I noticed your suit of armor back there. So when you said you're a little bit of a nerd, I'm like, probably.
Yeah, I like to go to the Renaissance festivals and stuff sometimes.
I've been there, done that. That's fun.
I used to do the HEMA fighting where you put on armor and beat the crap out of each other.
Right there with you. That's my father-in-law. He's the one that got us into that. Yep. He's in that group too, the HEMA group. That's his group. But we've built a lot of foam swords and had a lot of battles. He's taught us how to fight, both me and my wife. It's great exercise, I'll tell you that.
Well, one of my favorite scenes in cinematic history is Lord of the Rings, the first movie where they're fighting the troll. And there's no music. There's no flashy spin moves like the Hobbits and all the ones that came after. It was like, if you were going to fight a 14-foot tall mass of muscle, that's how you would do it, right? Yeah. And so I took that same idea into my world where you've got a planet with less gravity, so you've got plant and animal giganticism, but it isn't animals like we're accustomed to. In this world, it's insects that have evolved. and they're huge.
That is right where I am at.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say anymore, but
Okay.
but you know what I'm talking about. I know what you're talking about. That's where I'm at.
Okay. So when Pier and the Third are forming their formation to fight this giant centipede thing, what I'm going for is like, if you had to fight a giant bug and you didn't have guns and all you had was medieval style weaponry, this is how you would do it.
Right.
So my favorite books of all time are Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. It's not that they're necessarily the best written or the best laid out, and mine isn't either. I didn't follow any writing advice or conventions. I just wrote the story as it came to me. But Tolkien had a philosophy where if you want to sell an illusion, if you want an illusion to fool the viewer into thinking this is plausible, it has to fit within reality. It has to be something where you read it and you say, that could happen. Like, if those things existed, this is how it would happen.
The suspension of disbelief has to be small enough to where it can happen.
Yeah. And the other thing I did is, like, everybody wants to write the alternative. Like, for example, if all orcs are bad, then they're going to write a story about the orc that's good. And everybody does that. And to me, when the extraordinary becomes ordinary, that makes the ordinary extraordinary. So I'm trying to write about a more traditional good guys and bad guys. I mean, there's plenty of gray, but like, I didn't want to write the anti-hero story where it's the bad guy that's actually the good guy, because everyone does that. And I wanted to do something more wholesome, like Star Wars.
Right. All right. So you obviously love this, but you don't dill too much, or else you're going to tell the story, because it's enjoyable, and I know you love it, and it's easy to see why. But I don't want you to spoil too much for everybody.
All right. But one more thing. If you want to get kind of an idea of the setting and the canon, I've got a short story up on my YouTube page called The Mirror of Thoth. I mentioned it a little bit before. It's kind of a primer for part 2.
It is.
So yeah, it has nothing to do with the first one other than it takes place in the same canon.
Right.
The same universe.
Mirror of Thoth on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yep. Go check it out. Okay. Can I show you my surroundings?
Yes, please do. Let's see this lab of yours.
Okay. So you had a peek of this. This is actually Stephen Smith's old computer that he actually sent to me, because I talked with him, and he produced all the teapods, so he actually sent that out to me, and that is one of 11 monitors in my lab. Isn't that crazy? So there's a second one.
Greedy capitalist.
I know. There's the third one. Of course, the fourth one is the one that I'm using right now for this. Right here, that is one of my old cell phones, but it's attached to a microscope.
Wow.
This is a gravity experiment called the Cavendish device. I had another member of our community actually send that to me, and I'm running an experiment measuring the force of gravity. It is a very persnickety little thing. It's hard to get work. I've been working on it for like a month. This little box back there is my radon detector. So, and you'd be surprised, a radon actually is fairly common and not really good to read in. So I've got it set to a level that I should be aware, and it'll beep. And it has beeped like radon? 4 or 5 times. What's that?
What is radon?
It's a radioactive gas that seeps up through homes that don't have sealed basements and can cause problems. So, let's see, workbench. This is, of course, a Wimshurst machine, and right next to it, the camera's not can't really see it too well, but right here are some birthday candles, and I did a really cool demonstration that I've posted on my social media, where I generate sparks with the Wimshurst machine. In fact, look, see it like this. Okay, there's a little discharge that you can see there a little bit. But what's fascinating is if I light the candles, the flame is actually absorbing the charge building up on the Wimshurst machine. And it does that because of dark mode plasma. which
Explain.
is it. What's that?
How's that work?
Okay, so we know that plasma has three states. Arc mode. Wow, we have arc mode plasma, which is the sun and lightning. We have glow mode plasma, which of course is the auroras and stuff like
Gross.
this. Oh, you can't. Oh, the camera can't see that. That's my one of my Tesla coils with neon there. That's plasma in glow mode right there. And then the third state of plasma is plasma in dark mode. And if
Yeah.
you want to know what that is, just go like this. This is plasma in dark mode. It's everything around us that we touch.
Gotcha.
And we know that because when plasma is very electrically conductive, which gives rise to all of the Birkeland currents, everything, all that.
Right.
When I do this little experiment with the Wimhurst machine, there are two electrodes, and there is an arc discharge. My finger is the arc discharge. It goes zap, zap, zap. Because as I wind the wheels, it creates a static charge and discharges. When I put the candle, pretend my head is the candle, and the candle is about that close. The flame is, of course, plasma, but it absorbs the charge building up on the electrodes, even though they're not touching. They're not
Because
touching.
conducting plasma.
They're separated by almost 2 inches. But I can sit there and wind that Wimhurst machine over and over and over, and it will not discharge. It will not go spark.
Yeah.
Which tells me that the charge being built up is being absorbed by the flame and dissipated through the flame.
Right.
That is a perfect example of dark mode plasma.
Interesting.
Pretty dang cool. So
Yeah.
there's a heck of a lot of stuff here in my lab. I'm not going to go through all of it. Just give a little teaser. This is kind of just my museum shelves. That there's Mars. This is what's called a Sugihara illusion. This is an old device from the 1920s called a violet ray. It was supposed to zap your skin and make you healthy. Nah.
Yeah, but where's your cosmic death ray? Surely it's under construction. Oh, my bad.
I don't have a
I'm
cosmic.
painting my roof blue.
This is a lot of the stuff that I've 3D printed. And then finally, let's come over here I've got two chairs that I sit in. The one that I've been sitting in. This is my main chair, and behind me is another, just stuff that I've printed out and fun little things. There's another screen. That one I use to monitor the weather. As I roll around here, there's a whole bunch of screens right here. This is an old 11-year-old iPad that you can't see it, but oh, come on.
Have you considered getting a high back chair, a metal gauntlet, and a cat?
Yes.
Go real well in there.
Right. This one monitors the active aurora. Right now, this one measures the Global Consciousness Project, which I'm not going to talk about now, but it's fascinating.
Oh, we got to talk about that one later.
We will. That's also the Global Consciousness Project. This is my other iMac that I just basically use as a television. There's 3D printer. It's a Prusa. Love that thing.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's one of my main screens right now. It's monitoring the ISS live camera feed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually the camera on the ISS, and there's just a secondary screen which I'm monitoring the volcano of fire in Guatemala.
Mm.
So I've got 11 screens in here in my lab that I use to do stuff. And there's like I said, there's stuff everywhere. This would take hours and hours to describe everything that I have around here, but
that's so much better than my lab.
You see that?
Oh, you got the stick man on there.
Recognize that?
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
My stick man on stone. So
that was after I saw the lightning scarred surface of Mars, and I actually gave Dave's stuff a real try. That blew my mind more than anything, is seeing those plasma. Yeah. Because I've seen some of those. In fact, when I went to Thailand to get married to my wife, going and looking at the Buddhist temples there, they kind of have a Hindu style to them, but the hats, the headdresses that they put on Buddha, That is straight out of the Golden Age, where you've got Venus and Mars kind of getting out of alignment, and that plasma stream that forms the little
like the white cone,
about?
like
Yeah,
the white crown.
Yeah. And I
Really?
saw a lot of those same plasma symbols all over their temples.
Wow. You need to share that. We need to add that into the podcast and share that.
Oh,
If you
I'm
could
such a
pull that
nerd.
up.
Take many pictures, but I bet I can find them online.
That's probably true. We probably can. So if someone wanted to look that up, where would just look up what? What would
Thai Buddha, if you want to see the hat. It's a lot like those Egyptian hats that are kind of cones,
white crown?
but it goes off to the side and up. And you see that in Egypt too. It's a strange thing.
Well, and that we've got so much stuff to talk about, but maybe we'll end it here and use that as a teaser for the next time we get together and talk. Because the amount of things like hats and crowns and heroes' journeys, all three of those stem and are part of the Electric Universe story, as you well know.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. In fact, the tagline, I'll finish with this: our entire society, everything that we do and celebrate and have, is built upon the story of the Electric Universe, the cataclysm and what was happening a few thousand years ago on this planet.
Absolutely. All right, man, let's end it there. Otherwise, we'll be going all day.
We will be going all day.
All right,
Good
thanks,
talking to you.
Ben.
We'll do this again.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to the Brainstorm with Sparks and Finn. Hope you learned something new or found some food for thought. Join us next time as we explore this amazing electric universe. Cheers!